am going to go over week 2. But before I start in Genesis 6, I just want to go back over the first week of creation. So on day 1, light is created and the cardinal rule begins. That means there is a new order that is established in the first 7 days of creation. And then in day 2, we have the space that is created between the waters, and that is the sky. So a big thing to remember about day 2 is the waters and the separation between them. And then day 3 is when the land comes together and the seas come together. And seed is creates the plants, the fruit, the produce. So seed is an important part of day 3 along with the land and the seas. Day 4 is the luminaries, which are the lights that are different from the light of day 1, although it includes part of that light from day 1. That's the sun, moon, and stars. They create the heavenly government that provides seasons, days, and years, the timing. Day 5 is our day of birds and fish that fill the sky and fill the seas. So we see filling, swarming, multiplying is a big part of day 5. Day 6 is beast and man. And I'll just leave it at that for now. And we see a covenant built on day 6. We see a blessing from God between him and man. He gives man work to do, and then there is the covenant between male and female as the image. Both of them are the image of God. And then day 7 is our shalom, the perfect peace, the completion of all the host, and everything together collectively is very good. We also see kind of a day 8, which is what Genesis 3 presents to us. There is a transition. There is something new happening here. We see the need for reversal and repentance is introduced on the 8th day, which isn't specifically a day that this happens. It's not said when Genesis 3 happens, how long that the woman and man fellowshiped with God in the garden before the serpent decided to be used by the Spirit and tempt them. But it's a concept of that transition phase where something different is occurring. And then that's where the pattern of sin is introduced. So while there's an order of creation, there's also a pattern of sin when it says the serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild animals. It is introducing craft versus creation, because sin and evil's not independent. It cannot exist by itself. There must be something created that is good in order for sin to steal, kill, and destroy, to have something to pull apart and uncreate. So it's kind of a craft versus creation idea that is presented here when the serpent spirit approaches the woman and questions what God said to her. The mankind was told to subdue, but they listened to the subordinate creature whose craftiness runs in rebellious parallel to their naked naivety. Remember, they were naked and unashamed at this point. Shrewdness is not a bad trait to have, craftiness, tactfulness, but this serpent was allowing himself to be used as a tool of rebellion against God, to create separation between God and his creation, and to craft something different than the order of creation that God had made. So the serpent throws things out of order by getting the woman to listen to him when she should have been subduing the animal, the creation that was different from her. And then her husband listens to her and then blames God. So the ways that Adam and Eve sinned in Genesis 3 was trying to live independently of God. When the serpent tells her you can be like him, she should have said, I already am. I'm in his likeness. I'm in his image. That's how I was created. But instead, she wants to be like God independently in her own way. So she's tempted and she's convinced of that. God responds to them by asking the questions. I think I went over that in the last video. And there is an invitation, an entrance to sin and temptation and evil in our lives when we are willing to have any distance between God and ourselves. So he says, where are you? There's distance between us. This isn't how it should be. And then he says, who told you that you were naked and now you're hiding from me, right? And you're trying to control what I see of you, and you're trying to control what you see of each other, the male and the female. No longer is there full trust between them and between their relationship with God. So all of these relationships are distorted. And then he also asks them, have you done what I commanded you not to? Have you walked outside of my provision and my protection? Because now that you've done that, this order, these things have to change. And then he gives them the curse. So, those are some of the things I wanted to go over before we jumped into Genesis 6, because what we see here in our second week of reading is going back to that day 2. Remember that the waters were separated and had not come together. Things stayed separated on day 2, so it was not called good. And then here in the flood, we see a huge theme of those waters in the skies and waters from the grounds coming back together as the earth is essentially baptized. So I wanted to go back over Genesis 3 and how you see a reordering, a distortion of things in a day 8 kind of illustration, because that essentially leads to the baptism of the earth and how sin had multiplied to get to that point. We are in Genesis 6, and we start after the Nephilim, but just to go through that again, the problem is that the sons of God saw and took what they wanted and possessed the daughters of men rather than honoring or respecting the order of God and the ordainment of the covenant that he had made of each of their kind. They crafted distortion of one kind by crafting a different type of people, and that was the Nephilim. So that further polluted and perverted the order of God to the point where he just had to blot out everything from the earth with the flood. We started this second week's reading with Noah, who found, the first verse says, he found favor with the Lord and he was a righteous man, which was something that was achievable before the law, because we don't yet have the Mosaic law here yet, because it says that he was righteous, blameless, living on earth at the time because he walked in close fellowship with God. And that's like Enoch, which we read in Genesis 5:23. It's the same wording that's used there. And Enoch was the one ancestor, the grandfather of Noah, that was able to just transition into heaven, as far as it's read that he did not die. So the earth is filled, but not as God had commanded. He had commanded it to be fruitful and show order, show dominion, an order of dominion and subduing submission. But there was none of that. Everyone did and took and saw as they saw fit, as they wanted. So the earth is filled with, instead, with corruption and violence. And Noah is preparing the ark for about 100 years. During that time, the ark is built with the wood that grows from day 3, that was created from day 3. And so we see a connection there with what the ark is used to build with through wood, and it's also waterproofed with tar, which is made through water and earth and materials of the earth. Just make a note of that. We'll come back to that in a little bit. And there are 3 decks in the ark as well. So we see a lot of the number 3 and 6 there. And then the flood is a covering. It will destroy every living thing that breathes. There is a way for them to be delivered by entering into the ark. So there's a lot of a new order, that number 8, something being developed there that is entering in, which is deliverance. So we had the need for reversal and repentance enter in with sin in Genesis 3, and now in Genesis 6 we see the need for deliverance entering in through the ark and the flood. There is a connection to the covenant in pairs this time. There are 4 pairs of humankind, 7 pairs of each clean animal, and 7 pairs of birds that entered the ark within 7 days before the flood happened. On the 17th day of the 2nd month, which 17 is also a number in Hebrew covenants for taking an oath. So on the 17th day of the 2nd month, waters gathered for 40 days and 40 nights from the sky and from the earth, as Jesus's temptation period after his baptism also lasted 40 days and 40 nights in Matthew 3-4 and Luke 4. And then, they were in the wilderness for 40 years afterwards. So we see a good tie-in with the number 40 as well, having to do with baptism and a renewal, a new type of order. The Lord sealed the door shut in Genesis 7:16. The word used for that, a male and female of each kind entered, just as God commanded Noah. Then the Lord closed the door behind them. It's the same word that's first mentioned in Genesis 2:21, when the Lord seals the man's flesh shut over his rib after creating the woman. So there's a connection between the regathering that is happening there to try and bring a renewed covenant between them after shame and sin and corruption and violence has entered. There is a contrast after the flood in the sacrifice that Noah gives. Genesis 8 verse 21, because the Lord was pleased with the aroma of the sacrifice. In contrast to the sacrifice that Cain had given him, that the Lord rejected because Cain withheld something from the Lord. He was not giving his very best to the Lord, but he was withholding from him. The rainbow is the eternal covenant between God and all creatures to never have the flood again. So it is not just the covenant with mankind and Adam that is assumed from the beginning, but now we see the statement of a covenant between mankind and all creatures. So mankind is to see creation as an entrustment from God that they are to steward. So the subduance, the dominance over creation isn't to force or demand subjection, but it is to see that God has entrusted us to take good care of it. And I think this is pointed out at this point to try and reverse the demand of women having to be subject to men as well. God is trying to have us all see that we are partakers, co-laborers in his work. And he was trying to reverse and renew the order that he had first created through this worldly baptism, this worldwide baptism. After verse 8:21, we see and we had seen the contrast to Cain's original sacrifice and how Noah's was a pleasing aroma. Then we see the renewal again of the order of seasons, and there will be Moedim, planting and harvest time, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. So God would allow the repetition of seasons without ceasing so that we would be able to go through the cycles of festivals and things that we needed to do to learn to get closer to him rather than just making it cease. So he has now made a way for us to do that and confirmed his original covenant. In addition to the original covenant, he adds some things. So we start to see the development of a law here so that people can understand who God is as goodness and discern what it looks like when something is trying to destroy that. So along with the original covenant, God adds to that animals will look to mankind now in fear and terror. So rather than mankind having the responsibility of subduance and showing their dominance, God is actually creating animals to be aware that mankind is at the top of the food chain. They are placed in our power for food. We are not to eat blood or kill humans. And we are returned to the image of God rather than through Adam's likeness, like it stated when Seth had been born to them in Genesis 4. I'm sorry, that's in Genesis 5:3. Adam became the father of a son who was just like him in his very image. So now we see the renewal of us being in God's image. And then furthermore, in Genesis 9:19, it says, "From these three sons of Noah came all the people who now populate the earth." The next thing that happens is, unfortunately, the first sin. So, though God has baptized the world, sin is still present and allowed to grow along with the good and to constantly try and reverse what has been renewed. So they work in tandem now, unfortunately. Noah works the ground and reaps a harvest, but the first thing he does is indulge in creation. And then Ham's sin is dishonoring to his father, possibly to his mother. It's very vague about what that actual sin is there when it says that Ham uncovered his father's nakedness and told his brothers about it. There's a lot of theories. One of them that I found pretty surprising, because I have looked into it a few times. Why did he curse Canaan? Because Canaan was the fourth son of Ham. So why choose to curse Canaan and not Ham? And one of the theories that I read is that a possibility of Ham uncovering his father's nakedness could have been that he actually may have slept with his mother, or Ham's wife may have been pregnant with Canaan at the time, and Canaan was the result, or was either the result of Ham being with his own mother, or the result of his sin that happened while his son was in the womb, and that's why Noah chose to curse Canaan. The fact that, or the way that the Hebrew words are placed in that original reading is very vague, and it could mean because of the way that they referred to nakedness being uncovered, a father's nakedness being uncovered, it could mean him or his wife or his concubine or anything like that. So that's why that some early theologians thought that that was a possibility, that Ham had done that with his own mother. The reason that I mention that is because it still is showing us how quickly sin multiplies and depravity spreads. It affects everything. So baptism doesn't just erase the fact that this is still something we have invited in, and that humankind tends to entertain, but that God is constantly working to show the greater power of good that rises along with the sin. So I had asked everyone who was at study this week to look at the generations. I don't want to go too far into that, but you want to go back through Genesis 10:11 and try and number your generations the best you can. One of the things we did point out and notice is that the sons are listed different. They are listed as Shem, Ham, and Japheth in verse 18, and then when they list their descendants in Genesis 10, Japheth is listed first and Shem is last. And then Genesis 9:24 says that Ham is his youngest son. So it does seem like the son's birth order is a little ambiguous there, and that may be for a reason. But Adam and Eve would be the first generation. Cain and Abel would be your second generation. Cain, the name means possession. Abel, his name means breath. Enoch would be your third generation. His name means dedicated, and Cain dedicated a city to the name of Enoch. Enosh, which is really close to this Hebrew spelling of Enoch, also means man. So essentially, that third generation, Cain took care of a city dedicated to man. And then Enoch's son is the fourth generation, Arad, which means fleet, like a fleet of ships, or like yeah, that's all I can think of is a fleet of ships. And Mehugel is a name meaning struck by God, or smitten, as in like he was smited by God. That's the fifth generation. So I'm just going over these generations. Those are from Genesis 5 that we read last week. And the reason I'm listing these is because I want you to compare to the generations that are now coming from the sons of Noah, and see if you see some likenesses. Then we have Lamech is the sixth generation. His name means powerful. He is the first one to take 2 wives, and he commits the second murder of a young man who had to have been, because they were all only descendants of Cain, his family member, a young boy that was a family member. It was also believed that Lamech used the tools that his sons developed, that his sons crafted to kill. So unfortunately, even though good things are being made, they're being used for evil as well. His sons, Lamech, he marries his 2 wives. Adah means ornament or to adorn, his first wife. And Zillah means shadow. That's his second wife. The sons of Adah are Jabal and Jubal. Both of those names mean stream. And Jabal was the first to live in tents and herd cattle. Jubal was the first musician that played a harp and a flute. The other son was Tubal-Cain, which just means of Cain. And he was the forger of bronze and iron tools that Lamech probably used to kill. And then he had a sister named Naamah, which means loveliness or pleasant. Those are all the 7th generation. So then, through Seth, we see a likeness of the names and the generations. But we'll talk later about what generation Seth would have actually been born in, because there's some debate if he's the 2nd generation, because remember, he's born much later when Adam was 130. So maybe Seth is more like the 5th or 6th generation, and then that would put Noah at about the 14th. And then we are starting all over with the new creation of order, and Shem, Ham, and Japheth being the 1st generation again. These can be important because, remember, every name means something. So each of these names have a significant tie into the bloodline that leads all the way up to Jesus and the New Testament. And this is why these genealogies can actually be important when you get into some more complex study. I do want to touch on the Tower of Babel. The other thing that I wanted to point out is you have people that are speaking the same language, and unfortunately, they are actually doing a great thing because they are united. Genesis 11:6. The people are united and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. Sounds like a New Testament verse, right? But the problem, skip back up to the verse above that. Verse 4 says, "Come, let us build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world." There's our sky, right? Day 2, again, with this third rebellion. This is the third great rebellion of humankind, or involving humankind. Verse 3, continuing to go backwards, "Let's make bricks and harden them with fire." What they were using, actually, in this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used for mortar. So we see that tar again, that was actually used on the inside and the outside of the ark. I'll stop that there. So if you have any questions about those things, please do comment or send me a message. I'm trying to keep these videos as short as possible, and there are a lot of things in study, in person and through the videos, that people have asked me that I don't always explain well right away, but I promise you, as long as you stick with it, you'll get it. You'll get it. Those of you that have asked me questions, I will get to some of those on the videos. So if that's what you're looking for, I'm not forgetting you. I've gotten back to you personally, but I also will go through those on some of the videos. I'm just trying to pace how and when I introduce things, according to the Holy Spirit and my prayer, and in respect of your time, because I know not all of you wish to listen to these videos if they're long. So we also read from Isaiah 54 this week, and it's very easy to see the connection between Isaiah and Noah, because the very first verse is, "Just as I swore in the time of Noah that I would never again let a flood cover the earth." So it's referring back to Noah. Here we see in verses 11 and 12, there is the mention of the stones. So whenever you see a mention of the stones, that's referring us back to Genesis 2, the mention of the rivers and where the stones are in that first city, and that has to do with reference to order and things that those minerals and stones are meant to be used for. When you read, "I will rebuild," Isaiah 54:11 says, "I will rebuild you with precious jewels and make your foundations from lapis lazuli." That's sapphire, and that's another reference to the sky, because the sky is blue like the sapphire. So there we see another reference again to day 2, and how a lot of this is coming together in the second week. We are reading about things that happened on the second day of creation, and guess what? You're probably going to continue to see that as you move on each week. So don't be surprised. In verse 16, it says, "I have created the blacksmith who fans the coals beneath the forge and makes the weapons of destruction. And I have created the armies that destroy. But in that coming day, no weapon turned against you will succeed." So don't forget that while all these people are being willing to do things, are being able to do things, God gives gifts and is good, so he doesn't take them away, but he has created everything and he is working behind it. And then Luke 17, we read about the coming of the kingdom of God that is not seen by detectable signs, but by observation. It says, "The time is coming when you will long to see the day when the Son of Man returns, but you won't see it. People will tell you, 'Look, here he is,' but don't go out and follow them. For as the lightning flashes and lights up the sky from one end to the other, so it will be on the day when the Son of Man comes. And then it goes on to talk about in Noah's day, people were enjoying banquets and parties and weddings right up to the time Noah entered the boat and the flood came and destroyed them all. And as I mentioned, remember, it took 100 years. Noah was building the boat for all that time. So like one of the questions I asked at one point is, did a lot of the men had children by the time that they were 100 years old. So did Noah's sons have children that they had to leave behind? Or were they purposefully not trying to get their wives pregnant because they believed their father that this flood was coming? You have to remember they grew up all their lives seeing their father spend 100 years building this boat and saying there's a flood coming. We're preparing for this. Did they believe him? I don't know. It's really interesting. So thank you for sticking with me in this study. And again, send me your questions and I will do my best to get back to them in the order that it's going and keep these videos short. Keep praying for me as we continue on.